Today we climbed Lattrick Fell. The climb at first was through woods before opening up and giving us great views over Keswick and Derwent Lake. From the top we followed a ridge line, walked through a meadow dotted with sheep, and then along a muddy track that turned into a rocky track, where at the bottom we found a mobile ice cream truck, literally parked in the middle of nowhere, but within view of two trails. Despite the drizzle, we were customers. We then walked along the other trail that follows an abandoned railway and hugs the shore of the Greta River. We got waylaid by a sign indicating a trail to the Castlerigg Stone Circle. We couldn't resist. This is Lattrick Fell and the ridge line that we followed down into the valley and then onto the railroad trail. Then we walked up the steep road to get to the Castlerigg Stone Circle. The stones aren't high in stature, being 1 to 2.5 meters tall. There are 38 stones, which are placed in a 30-meter wide circle that is surrounded by stunning countryside. The circle was created around 3000 BC and is one of the earliest examples of a stone circle in England. We then meandered through a series of unmarked pathways that looked like they were headed in the right direction, and surprisingly to us, we made it to the edge of town. The day started with a bus ride along the eastern shore of Lake Derwent, along a winding, narrow road lined with either moss-covered stone walls or neat hedgerows that are kept well trimmed by the brushing bus. We disembarked at Rosenwaite, where we struggled to find our trailhead. We found the trail signage to be poor to non-existent. After finding the right farmer's field to cross, we started to climb up High Spy, and from there followed the ridge line to Maiden Moor and Catbells. Along the way, we passed a stream as it made its way to the valley floor. Near the top, we came upon an abandoned slate mine. Those miners had quite a commute. A staircase was built amongst the waste rock that took us to the final push to the summit. At this point, the rain began and the clouds closed in as we walked the ridgeline towards Maiden Moor and Catbell summits. The descent from Catbells was a scary scramble down a craggy rock face. No choice but to go down it. As we descended, the clouds parted and we got our first view of the lake. We then ended up on a steep, slippery sheep path down to lake level. We missed the launch to take us across the lake, so we walked back to town. Today was supposed to be the rainy day, as opposed to yesterday. We started the day by taking a launch tour around the lake. This gives you great views of the surrounding hills and of where we had hiked the last 2 days. After the boat tour, we walked to what is said to be one of the top 3 views in all of Europe. We then visited the Pencil Museum, makers of Derwent pencils and crayons. Today, Mary and I went our separate ways so I could rest a strain in my knee and Mary could climb a higher peak. I started my day at Crow Park that offered stunning views of the surrounding hills and Derwent Lake. During my walk, I came upon the split stone, which celebrates the centenary of the National Trust. The walk was so pretty. It took me through forests, farmers' fields, and along the stunning shoreline of Derwent Lake. Meanwhile, Mary spent the morning climbing Skiddaw. It was a very frosty morning, and the winds were quite gusty, but she enjoyed the climb and all of the fabulous views from the top. Today we hiked to Walla Crag, the hills that rise from the eastern shore of Derwent Lake. The start took us along a narrow laneway, then skirted the edge of a farmer's field, then across a stream as we slowly gained elevation. At the top, we got an impressive 360-degree view of the lake, the surrounding moor that reminded Mary of the Scottish Highlands, and the village of Keswick and Bassenthwaite Lake in the distance. As we descended the far side, we got a wonderful view of the southern end of Derwent Lake before dipping down into a lush, vibrant wood that led us to a laneway with a beautiful old stone bridge before descending to the shoreline and eventually to the Lodore waterfall. We then skirted around the southern end of the lake and then walked up the western shoreline, passing through an old-growth forest along the way. A great day with tons of variety. This is the valley we should have seen on our second hike from High Spy to Cat Bells. It began with a beautiful walk through a sun-dappled forest, but soon turned into a rainy walk through a farm and its fields, with one break in the clouds giving us a rainbow. By the time we reached Littletown, our turnaround point, it was pouring rain, pretty well all the way back to Keswick. Cold and wet, we popped into a cafe for tea and scones and warmth before boarding a bus to Ambleside. It was supposed to rain today, so we took a loop trail that kept us out of the higher hills. We took the bus to Skelwith Bridge, followed the river for a while, then we looped through forests, coming out into farmers' yards and fields, following the rhythm of the rolling hills. We then climbed to the Colwith waterfall. Which historically was utilized by a small hydroelectric plant. Nearby was a log that had coins embedded into it. It is said that if you add a coin, you'll have good health, but if you take a coin, illness will befall you. The village of Elterwater sits on the shores of a pretty river that flows into Elterwater Lake. We passed by a tarn, a mountain lake, before we ascended on our return to Ambleside and got our first view of Windermere Lake. It was such a lovely day. The steep climb to our Airbnb. The day started with the struggle, a steep 20% grade, windy, narrow road. We veered off that into a farmer's lane, then across one of their fields where we encountered some Highland coos blocking the trail. As we walked up the valley, our eyes kept drifting to another struggle, a steep, rocky climb up the other side of the valley that would give us access to the ridgeline that we could follow back towards town. After surveying the struggle for quite some time and conferring with some Galloway cattle, we decided to opt for a different route. This route involved crossing a boggy farmer's field, scooting through a gap in the stone fence, then bushwhacking through dead ferns on a steep slope, a different kind of struggle. It was worth all of the struggles because the views from the top were amazing. We could see the entire length of Lake Windermere and on towards the coast. In the other direction, we had a view of Rydal Lake, a favorite of William Wordsworth. While the day had its struggles, I wouldn't have changed a thing. Today was overcast all day, a harbinger of the very rainy weather predicted for tomorrow. With a low cloud deck, we decided to walk a figure-8 loop around two of the many lakes around here. We did the usual forest and farmers' fields ramble before entering the Rydal Mount estate. Wordsworth lived for a period of time and died in a cottage on this estate. Many an artist and a literary figure came to this small building by the falls to be inspired by nature. After crossing this estate, we picked up the coffin trail, which was used to transport the dead from Rydal to Grasmere back when the town had no church. A resting place for the coffin bearers also gave us our first view of Lake Rydal. This ancient walking trail was beautiful and immaculately constructed. We then headed down to the Rydal River and walked the far shore of Lake Grasmere and into the village of Grasmere itself. We had to stop for the world-famous Grasmere gingerbread. We then traced the shoreline back down to the Rydal River so we could follow the far shore of Lake Rydal. After a climb up the hillside, we came to Rydal Cave, which is the remnant of an old mining operation. We then retraced our steps back to Ambleside. Another beautiful day in this magical place. Today was an all-day rain, so we walked to the nearby Stockgill Force waterfall. As you climb the hillside, you pass a series of smaller waterfalls before coming to the main event. At the bottom, this river winds its way through the town of Ambleside, past an old mill and under the bridge house. We arrived at St. Bees, nestled on the shore of the Irish Sea, and set off to walk St. Bees Head. This is the starting point of the Coast to Coast Trail. As we climbed, we got a view of the town. We followed the undulations of the coastline. Our destination was a lighthouse. The weather began to turn on us. The wind picked up, and a squall drenched us as we reached the lighthouse. As we returned, the sun came out, and as we looked out into the ocean, we could just make out the faint outline of the Isle of Man, 30 miles off the coast, and the cliffs of Scotland looming in the mists to the north. Back in St. Bees, the tide was going out. Tired and wet, we made it back to our hotel for a pint of beer and dinner. The next morning, before we caught our train to Stirling, we toured the town. The old school, the 1,000-year-old church, and the house that Mary's friend's mother used to live in. After a day of travel to Stirling, the duo became a trio with the arrival of Jean. With Storm Ashley arriving tomorrow, today would be our only dry day. To take advantage of the weather, we headed to Stirling Castle. This castle was the main residence of the Stuarts, James V, Mary Queen of Scots, and her son James VI, who after Elizabeth I's death became James I. It then became a military installation and has been renovated to return it to the Stuart glory. This is the back door to the castle. This is the old church where James VI was baptized. This is the castle's main courtyard, and many of the royal residents are in this building. The banquet hall, the throne room, the main bedroom, the history of this place was just incredible. And you can see every step of it in this worn door sill. I then stopped at the Church of the Holy Rood, originally built in 1129 and rebuilt in 1406 after a fire. Mary's son, James VI, had his coronation here when he was just 13 months old. In the 1650s, there was a dispute between two ministers, and a wall was built within the church, dividing it into the east and west congregation. This wall remained for 280 years. After the rain, we headed to the Wallace Monument, which is erected to celebrate William Wallace, aka Braveheart, although the Scots scorned that movie for its inaccuracies. Wallace was the mastermind behind the Scottish strategy during the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297. The British had captured Stirling Castle, while the Scots congregated on the high ground where the monument now stands. The bridge created a bottleneck for the British, who were clad in heavy armor, so there was no retreating to the river as the Scots approached. This decisive win led to King Bruce eventually reclaiming Scotland from the British. There are 3 floors of displays, and the only way up is by a very narrow, windy stone spiral staircase of 246 steps. The outside wall of the staircase is lined with slits open to the elements, so we were buffeted by the remaining wind of Storm Ashley. Tricky climbing, doubly so if you had to pass someone coming from the other direction. Today was our last day together. Tomorrow, Jean and Mary head off for Oban, and I to Edinburgh for my flight home. I had a wonderful afternoon in Edinburgh. My first stop was Holyrood Palace, the official residence of the current king and historically Scottish royalty when they had official business in Edinburgh. The palace started as an abbey in 1128, which is now a ruin. 35 years later, monastic buildings were added that had a residence for King David I of Scotland. In 1503, James IV turned those buildings into a palace when he married Margaret, King Henry VIII's sister. In 1671, Charles II made it into the palace that we see today. So much history and many of the same names that we heard about in Stirling Castle. No photography is allowed inside, but trust me, it's quite grand. I then walked through Calton Hill, Edinburgh's first public park, created in 1724. From 1760 through 1820, the period of Scottish Enlightenment, many monuments were built here, including a monument to Nelson. The views up here were also wonderful. I'm leaving this remarkable place tomorrow. I'll always hold great memories of this wonderful trip.